Hey guys, Steeble here. Today we're going to be talking about upgrading commanders, kind of the strategy and thinking that I employ while doing so. I get a lot of questions from you guys in comments, and I have these discussions with a lot of people on my Discord. So I know it's an important topic. I think it's one of the more interesting parts. Aside from the gameplay, it's a pretty interesting aspect of the game. So first we're going to be talking about the currency that's involved. Now you see we got promotion orders, insignias, and personal and universal commendations. I would rank insignias the most important. I find they're the most rare. I've had 10, and I'm pretty sure I got some for being an alpha tester, and this is about 3.5, 4 months into the game cycle. So they're very rare, very useful. Personal commendations you get for duplicate commanders in crates. So if you have my luck, you get them every, about 85-90% of the time. Now the personal accommodations only apply to that particular commander that you get a duplicate of. Keep that in mind. Universal accommodations also very rare. I think we have 3 or 4 available in the current campaign. Useful, but I don't think they're as useful as insignias. And I'll talk more about why here in a little bit. Promotion orders, you get those quite often. You get some each week just from playing the game. If you have premium ships, you get some each week for that. They show up in random missions from time to time, and you get a bunch throughout the campaigns, both for free and in the Admiralty backing branches. So promotion orders, while still very valuable, are a little bit more readily available, allowing you to play around with them a little bit. Insignias and commendations you should be putting a fair amount of thought in before you go spending those. Now when it comes down to actually ranking up your commander, here's how I go about it. The main things you want to focus on are rank 8 and rank 11. Those are the ranks you get inspirations for your commanders. Inspirations massively boost their performance and give you a lot more flexibility in your build. Rank 8 takes about 12 promotion orders, I believe, and I actually put every single commander in the game at rank 8. That'll boost their base trait that's available for other inspirations to roughly just below half of its full maximum value, making it viable and useful. And the commander himself will be decent enough to experiment with. Rank 11, you want to put your commanders that you're primarily using. So if you have a commander that you're using on USN destroyers, for instance, eventually you want to focus on getting him to rank 11. That'll maximize. You get 2, inspirations, which will maximize the inspiration power, and the skills involved with the build will also be quite powerful at that point. Now, who do you want to max? You can see I have Norman Scott maxed here. Why is that? I have him as an inspiration for every cruiser build in the game. So by maxing him, I am helping out every single cruiser to quite an extent. His trait is improving the precision of my cruisers. So I chose him because I love cruisers, and he's my best commander I currently have, so I maxed him. That helps out every cruiser in the game. So who you're using for inspirations across the board, focus on maxing those commanders first, then focus on leveling up the commanders that you use often for those lines of ships, and then you can kind of fill in the blanks after that. Legendary status, I see a lot of people are hung up online about how long it's going to take. You'll get legendary status in all your commanders in due time. You'll get legendary status rank 2. It'll take longer, but it'll happen just through the normal play of the game. Rank 3 and 4, I wouldn't count on it if you play for years and years, or if you have a lot of money to spend on it. Fine, you can rank those up, but you're just getting a few percentage points of incremental, benefit to your commander. So far less important than the inspirations. So again, the commanders you're using for inspirations on other ships, max those first, and then the commanders that you're using throughout your ship lines. A couple last things to think about before we talk about recommended inspirations for each class of ship. Anytime a trait or a skill says it applies to a specific class of ship, like you can see on my screen here, directed impact increases the main battery precision of your cruiser. That only affects cruisers. If you put that inspiration on a battleship commander, it's going to be completely worthless. So keep that in mind. But if it says increase main battery precision of your ship, then that applies to any class of ship in the game. So keep that in mind. That allows for some interesting options that you might not necessarily think about. And talking about generic commanders, we're talking about Dewey, my favorite commander in the game, Togo, Jellicoe, and Shear. They tend to have fairly strong traits, which should be considered. So if you are going to use those traits, I would consider leveling up the commander. But in terms of skills, they're not as powerful as the commanders that are dedicated to those ship lines. Each nation has 2 destroyer commanders, 2 cruiser commanders, 2 battleship commanders. So I'd recommend using those specific commanders if you have them available for that line of ship. And if that's the case and you're not planning on using the base trait, don't put any more leveling in it than level 8. But again, if you're going to use the base trait as an inspiration, then consider leveling it up to your heart's desire. And just so we're clear, I don't think Dewey is the best commander in the game. I'm sure he's a fine soldier and a fine human being, but he's just a bit of a joke on my channel because I've gotten about 8 duplicate George Deweys in crates, so I wouldn't recommend using him. Now, taking a look at each class of ship, I'll kind of give you the top 5 inspiration options in my opinion. Now, the beauty of the commander system is it allows you to customize your ship your way. So just because I think it's great doesn't mean that's actually true, but these are my recommendations. So for destroyers, you got Eric Bay and Jerzy Swirsky. Bay is a German destroyer commander. Swirsky is the Polish destroyer commander. They both affect your ship's concealment. Now, Swirsky is universal. It applies to your ship's concealment. Bay is your destroyer's concealment. So Swirsky, I actually currently use him on cruiser builds, and I have him on every destroyer build. You can actually put both these guys as inspirations, and that would be a very powerful concealment build for your destroyer. Something to think about, but I would probably recommend at least one of them if you have access to them. Second, take a look at Tanaka, the Japanese destroyer commander. His base trait increases torpedo damage. Torpedoes are kind of the bread and butter of destroyers, and depending on like your nation, like my understanding is German destroyers torpedoes aren't as strong as say Japanese torpedoes, so they may be de-emphasized in certain lines of ships, but torpedoes are definitely the main way that destroyers are able to deal damage, at least in general. And all these recommendations are in general. You're going to have to look at each ship and use your knowledge of the game to apply them. Burke, American destroyer commander, he increases the main gun precision of destroyers. That's a very strong trait, especially on destroyers that are more geared towards the gunboat side of the spectrum as opposed to torpedo boats. So definitely consider him. Reginald Tyrwhitt, the UK British destroyer commander, his base trait increases decreases the time to reload the torps, and it actually protects you against steering gear impairment, which is one of the 2 main threats that are facing destroyers, along with their engine being disabled. So that's a very strong trait in that it helps both your torpedoes offensively and your defensive capabilities. Sims is an interesting one. He's an American battleship commander. He gives you an HP bonus per level of what tier you're playing. So it doesn't affect battleships very much because the hit point pool is so great to begin with that getting like 1,000 HP or whatever it is isn't going to really make that much of a difference. But if you put that boost to the destroyers, well, that's a significant percentage boost to your HP, so you can consider that as well. So those are my top 5. Other ones to consider is Anton Gurin. He's the Soviet destroyer commander that people got with the Gremyash, if you got that ship. He increases the AP penetration chance. Bill Halsey, American destroyer commander, increases AP damage. Von Spee, the destroyer commander of Germany, decreases the smoke reload time. And Philip Vian, I believe his name is, increases incoming dispersion on destroyers. So I would take a look at those I would place less importance on those than my top 5, but those are all very viable options for you to consider as well. Now for cruiser commanders, my main recommendation is Norm Scott. His base trait increases the precision of your main guns Cruisers already have very accurate main guns, but giving a boost to that even more just makes them that much deadlier. So I definitely lucked out with getting Norm Scott early on, and he's the only one that I've taken the time to max so far. Next up, we have Makawa, and again, you can use Swirsky as alternate here. Makawa increases the concealment of your cruiser, and again, Swirsky increases the concealment of your ship. I think a lot of players don't fully yet grasp the value of concealment in general, but especially when it comes to cruisers. Increasing your concealment allow you to disengage. It'll give you more maneuverability, time to kind of disengage from the enemy, change your position, find a new opportunity to re-engage, and so forth. So perhaps I place more value on the concealment than other players do, but that's my personal recommendation. Next up, Yamamoto. I don't have him. He increases the AP penetration value of your ship. I would definitely recommend that on your German cruiser builds. The players, I said, I've talked to that are using him are extremely pleased with results. The AP penetration on German cruisers gets quite limited when they're not basically fully broadside to you. So, and by the way, their AP damage is so strong that the greater chance you can get to actually score hits with those rounds is very nice. But in general, AP penetration is going to help all cruisers. Now, cruisers are going to spend a fair amount of time shooting HE as well. And for instance, Japanese cruisers, I would put less value on the AP pen. Even though they still are going to be firing AP shots, they use HE more than, say, other nations. So Yamamoto, I'd still recommend him highly, but weigh his value to whatever nation's line of ships you're thinking about applying him towards. Madden, British Battleship Commander, very interesting. Decreases the reload time and increases turret traverse. There are a number of cruisers in the game. American heavy cruisers come to mind. The Mayoko comes to mind. Turret traverse can be limiting on some cruisers, so cutting that back, very useful. Cutting down the reload time, very useful. Cruisers are all about maximizing DPM, damage per minute, so both of those extremely valuable. If I had Madden unlocked, he would probably be a feature in most, if not all, of my cruiser builds. Luchin's German cruiser commander increases AP damage. Again, you're going to have to weigh the ship line, but in general, I think anything you can do to increase the DPM again, I think is valuable. I could consider switching him out with some of these other ones that I'll mention. That one I find the least valuable, but it's still very viable on a lot of builds. Togo, interesting choice here, Japanese generic commander. He cuts down on the reload time of consumables. Consumables are a main feature of many cruisers, so that's a viable option and one you should get a bit of consideration too. Tanaka, again, destroyer commander of Japan. Cuts down on the torpedo reload time. American cruisers, that's not going to be, it shouldn't be a factor, at least not the high tier ones. But for Japanese cruisers, German cruisers that have torpedoes, potentially other cruiser lines that come down the line, that could be an interesting option to think about. And Fraser, the UK line, increases ship speed. That's interesting to think about. Anything you can do to make yourself harder to hit and more maneuverable is definitely something to be considered as well. Next up, Battleship Commanders. My top recommendation for Battleship Commanders is Andrew Cunningham, British Battleship Commander. He increases the precision of your main batteries. Battleships in general are very inaccurate ships, and anything you can do to increase the precision of the batteries is definitely going to help deal damage, which is Battleship's main priority. Along with tanking damage, of course. And so I find Cunningham to be very viable. I don't have a lot of Battleship Commanders currently unlocked, but I do use Cunningham in all my builds, and I would probably wind up keeping him for most of them as time goes on. Ciliax, the German Battleship Commander, he increases AP damage. Again, anything you can do to even increase furthermore the damage that battleships are dishing out, I find that to be very valuable. So I would consider him strongly as a second inspiration. Takagi I do currently have. He increases the hit points restored by the repair party. Battleships, the more you can do to keep them alive longer, that's going to help your results with the battleships. So that's a very interesting inspiration, and one that I currently use, I believe, on all my battleship builds. Again, I don't have a lot of options at the moment. Madden, again, another very interesting option, and again, cuts down on the reload and turret reverse time. So those are even more pronounced problems, I guess you could say, on battleships than cruisers, but that's just kind of the fact of life on battleships. So, well, I'd still strongly consider using Madden. I think he's just slightly actually more valuable as a cruiser commander inspiration than a battleship commander inspiration, but again, that doesn't diminish the value of that inspiration. So definitely strongly consider that one. And Shear, another generic one, this time the German generic. He decreases chance to catch fire and decreases the damage control reload time. So both of those are very valuable. Now, interesting enough, Lee, who I kind of would put as a secondary recommendation, he cuts down on the time flooding is occurring on your ship, and then also cuts down on the damage control reload time. I think the fire is more valuable. You're going to be on fire more often than you are flooded. Now, granted, flooding is a major problem, but cutting down the time that you're flooded, while certainly useful, you need to be able to repair that flood. So I'd say you're more likely to be on fire, and you're cutting down the damage control time with both of them. So that's why I think Shear is just slightly more valuable than Lee. Both very strong options, so that should be considered, but I do have Shear in my top 5 and Lee is my kind of secondary recommendations. Another generic as a secondary recommendation, Jellicoe, British generic. He increases the duration of the repair party. So again, that's going to increase how much HP is restored by your repair party. Again, increasing the longevity of your battleship, which is definitely a good thing. And surprising perhaps, but I actually do have George Dewey as a kind of a secondary recommendation to consider at least. He increases the torpedo visibility. Now, torpedoes are obviously the main threat to battleships. Destroyers, I talk about it all the time, destroyers are the main threat to your battleship, and your battleships are where the HP resides in the team's collective HP pool. So that's why eliminating destroyers is so valuable. But Dewey actually does give a boost to spotting those torpedoes, which can help you avoid them. They're still going to be tough to avoid, so not one of my top recommendations, but it's certainly something to consider. So George Dewey does get a little bit of a thumbs up from me on that one. So that's it for this video. I hope you guys did find it informative and useful. If you did, please hit the thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, you should consider subscribing. I got a lot of World of Warships coming all the time for you. Questions for me, comments, don't hesitate to leave them below. I love to hear from you. And we'll see y'all later. All right, peace.